All right, good morning. I'm going to have 11:14, but I'll go ahead and get started. I know everybody will be anxious probably to get to lunch or maybe some rest for this afternoon or shopping or whatever you have in mind. So this is the class for building a culture of faith in your house. In the home and family track, so hopefully this is where you were wanting to be. I'll just introduce myself. My name is Marsha Haldorsen, and I'm from Mattoon, Illinois, actually. And I was born and raised in the Mattoon Church, and my husband and I raised our children in the church there. I play the drums, and so I have been so honored to join you at your ladies' conference for the past 6 or 7 years. And I always enjoy coming here. You all treat me so kindly and so warmly. This year has been extra warm. It's not usually 100 degrees, but I come to ladies' conference, and I was hoping it would be a little bit cooler up here, but it's really not. So I kept watching the temperature gauge on my car yesterday. It was 95, 96 or something. So but it's good to be with you again. I want to give honor. I know she's probably out and about. I want to give honor to Sister Hildorsen, who asked me to share what's on my heart for this topic. And of course, I give honor to my pastor's wife, for allowing me to come. My pastor's wife, Sister Lisa Dowdy, if you were here last year, she spoke at this conference, and so I love and appreciate them. So those are my roots. And so I do have experience in parenting. My husband and I have 4 children, and our son Eustace is 20 years old. He's actually graduating from community college. It's kind of like the halfway point. He's graduating tonight, so I told him to take lots of pictures. And then we have 3 girls, Callan, and my oldest 2 daughters. If you're with me this weekend, I'm so happy. Callan is 19. They're 17, and our youngest, Jordan, is 14. So we have 4 kids in about 6.5 years. And so those of you who have children, whether they're younger or in that age, that takes a lot of faith. But they all live for God. They are all very involved in ministry, and I'm so thankful for that. I'm so proud of them. And it's so nice when they get to the age that they can come and help you. All of those who have survived the younger ages, and you're a little bit older now and have older kids, say amen. When you get to that age, it's so fun, so nice. So just to give you a little background, I was 28 when my husband and I got married, so I was a little bit older, and we wanted to have a bigger family. And so we didn't wait too long before wanting to have children. And but we kept waiting, and it was taking a long time, it seemed like. And so 2 years into that, and we still had not gotten pregnant, we got a little bit concerned. And but I want to say God always has a plan. And so we finally got pregnant. And 8 weeks later, I had a miscarriage. And for those of you who have been through that, and especially after waiting for a while, you know the huge disappointment and heartache that is. And so, but again, God always has a plan. And so we had to keep the faith. And just a few short months later, we got pregnant again. And so in November 2001, we finally had our first child. And so, and once the blessings started, they just didn't stop. So we had Eustace in November, 16 months later, 16 months later, we had Callan. 2 years later, we had Barrett, and about 3 years later, we had Jordan. So again, 4 children within 6.5 years. And you know, as prepared as you think you are, even if you're a little bit older, parenting and being a mother takes a lot of faith, right? And so every step of that way has required faith. And so what is faith? The topic for this session is building a culture of faith in your home. And so I know we all know, generally speaking, what faith is. And even when I looked up the definitions, There was nothing, shocking about it. The dictionary definition of faith is the complete trust or confidence in someone or something. So complete trust or confidence. And of course the Bible's definition, or at least one of the definitions, probably the one that we're most familiar with, is faith is the substance of things hoped for, the evidence of things not seen. So when I was waiting on my children, wanting that family that I couldn't seem to get yet, it took a lot of faith. But even after they were born, it probably took even more faith, because then I'm responsible, right? And so now, how do I create? I'm responsible for their upbringing. I'm responsible for making sure, or trying my best to make sure that they live for God. So I just want to say, whether you're waiting for a child, or maybe you have young toddlers that you are raising in God's ways, or maybe you have teenagers and you're trying to guide them towards adulthood, I want to bring an encouraging word for you today. And so I'm going to try to give you a biblical view of parenting and creating a culture of faith in your home, and some practical tips on how to intentionally build that culture. So creating a culture, to me, is very intentional and requires a lot of consistency. In my professional life, I have been involved in some cultural work. I work in a hospital system in Mattoon. We have about 2,700 employees, and so it's a large organization. There are people constantly coming and going, new employees, people retiring or leaving. And so one of the things I've learned is that it requires consistency. You have to reiterate, even if they're simple things, you have to reiterate that and live that. It's probably even more important to live it every day. And so the Bible actually, when you really try to study parenting and skills that you'll need, the Bible, I think, tells us surprisingly little about how to raise our children. We know the verses about that to give them instruction on the importance of teaching the Word of God to our children, and the importance of disciplining our children. But there's really not an exact roadmap, right? Or instructions like the kids don't come with instruction booklets. We kind of have to read the Bible, apply it to our lives, and then pass that on and teach that as well as we can to our children. But what we can look at are some examples. So I want to say what I have to say today through a couple of examples, and these will be familiar to you. And of course, one of the first examples that I think of when I think of a mother in the Bible is Hannah, right? And background is similar. She had to have faith because she was barren. And so I won't go into it or read from it today, but if you want to look up her story, particularly look at the first couple of chapters in 1 Samuel. But Hannah had to wait for her first child, and again, those of you who maybe have experienced that know that with that you find a lot of bitterness. You want to be happy for everybody else that's having children, but you just seem to keep waiting and waiting for that promise. And so that was Hannah's situation. And so she promised God that if he would give her a son, that she would give him back to the Lord. And I know you're all familiar with this story. And so nowadays, we dedicate our children to the Lord. But Hannah actually took Samuel to Eli, to the house of the Lord when he was young, and gave him to God's work. And so can you imagine taking your toddler, I mean the Bible says it was when he was weaned, can you imagine taking your toddler and just dropping him off at church? That would take a lot of faith. I certainly hope there were women there that were taking care of Samuel, because that would be scary if it was just a bunch of men taking care of a toddler. But through Hannah's example, we see that some people, we know that some people make promises. We make promises, right? We make promises and vows to God. But not everybody keeps them. And so we look at Hannah and say, as an example of, I have made these vows, I have made these commitments to God, I have committed my children to God, And whatever comes, I have to have the faith that that's going to be, that everything's going to be okay, right? And I remember my son, when he was getting ready, I think, to start high school, we went to the, whatever it is, orientation, and afterwards we were talking about some of the classes he would take, and he said, well, what if I want to be a missionary? And it took me a little bit back, because I want my kids close to me, right? I want them growing up, I want my grandkids someday to be close to me. And I'm like, oh, that's a whole other level of commitment. It would be to let my children go off into another country, and so we're not to that point yet. We'll see what comes of that. But it really makes you think, am I really invested? Am I really committed to that promise? And so when you can't see the outcome, but you do what God asks of you, or what you have committed to Him, you are walking in faith, right? So when you don't know what's coming down the road, and let's face it, we don't. There's hardly ever a time that we can say decisively that we know exactly what's going to happen. But we walk by faith. So what do we learn from Hannah's example of faith? And I apologize, I meant to say at the beginning that I don't have a handout in the little Dropbox thing. I went to the Enneagram class. I'm definitely a 5. I knew that already. I'm a thinker, so I can never just shut down off and say, okay, here's my handout. So, but if you take notes, or if you want them afterwards, I'll be glad to share them. So what do we learn from Hannah's example of faith? Number 1 is that God rewards those who seek Him diligently. And again, creating a culture requires you to work at it every day. And so we know from the Scripture that God rewards us when we seek Him diligently. Number 2, parenting teaches us patience and to rely on God. And so when having 4 kids and working and staying involved in ministry, that all requires a lot of patience, right? And I look across the room and I see a wide variety of ages, and so that is great, because I think I have something to appreciate about all of you. But as a young mother with young children, that requires patience. And I want to say that, and I'll probably say this later too, but we see too many young mothers give up on being involved in a ministry because they have young children. And I would encourage you not to do that because of a lot of reasons. Have the patience. Be patient with yourself. Be patient with your children, and stay involved. Number 3, when God blesses us and we give back to Him, He will continue to bless us. So we can't just receive the blessings, right? Our children are our biggest blessing in life. We can't just receive them and then not give them back. And so Hannah did that. We have to do that, and that requires faith. Number 4, if you put your children in God's hands, He will give you the wisdom needed to raise them. I think it's so interesting if you go and read 1 Samuel, again, the first couple of chapters, that in the first chapter, I kind of see Hannah as this simple woman. She's young, she wants a child, she's praying, she's very consumed with having that child. And then in chapter 2, after she's had Samuel and is getting ready then and thinking about his future, she reads, or she prays this prayer, and it's full of wisdom. And so I think that when God gives us our children and ordains us as a mother, basically, that He will give us the wisdom to do that if we continue to follow Him and follow His principles. So number 5, if you train your children to live for God, He will raise them up to be everything that you hope for. And so don't lose sight of that. In 1 Samuel 3:19, it says that Samuel grew, and the Lord was with him, and all of Israel knew that Samuel was established to be a prophet of the Lord. And so again, if you train your children, we have a promise from God that He will establish them and continue to use them as He sees fit. So we all have dreams for our children, and want them to have the best lives that they can. But we have to allow God's Word and His ways to shape them and their paths. So, practical tips. So, I'm going to give you some things now, the ways that I have applied these principles. So, number one, involve your children in church and ministry from an early age. So, again, too many new mothers, and I know there's an adjustment period, believe me, that has to take place from being not responsible for a young one to being a mother. But too often I see young mothers who almost step back out of ministry. And there's so many ministries involved in the church. I would encourage you to stay involved because it's important to let your children see you involved in church and ministry. So I'm involved in the music ministry, primarily in my church, and since my kids were babies, I took them with me. And I know it requires a lot of patience, and you have to juggle some things, but it's important again for them to see you involved in the church. And then when they started to get old enough, I had them help me with things. And again, it might not be perfect or whatever, and for those of us who like things perfect, again, patience gets involved. But it doesn't really do any good to tell them what to do. They learn better by you being an example. And so take them with you. Number three, allow those in the church to help you with your children. And again, this will allow you as a mother to be an example for your children. So our church has a drama ministry. I'm sure many of you do too. We've done Easter dramas, we've done Christmas dinner theaters, we've done youth dramas, and believe it or not, all four of my children were born within 2 weeks of a drama production. And so, as a drummer or other duties that I've had, the show must go on, I guess. So, the worst probably was Barrett, my little daughter. She was born the weekend before the next weekend was our Easter drama. So I had her on Saturday morning, and she was my 9-pound baby. And so had her on Saturday morning. On Wednesday night, I was at dress rehearsal, putting on the drums. So luckily, we have more older drummers now, and I wouldn't have to do that anymore. Not that I'm going to have any babies anymore, but so I came in that night. I'll never forget it. I came in, I had her carrier. Of course, the drums are, kind of off to the side of the cage. And so I sat her in the corral with the carrier, and they all took care of her while I was during the play, during the rehearsal. But it's important that you allow those in the church. They want to help you. Okay, your church family is a big piece of your support system, and so let them help you. And then teach your children to interact with everybody in the church. This is an intergenerational thing. That's why I like seeing such a wide variety of ages here. Those of us with a little more gray hair, those of you that are younger. I want my children to know and to hear of the walks of faith from the previous generations that they have walked. And so get them involved with, let them know those of previous generations in your church. That's so important. And then lastly, consistency is key. And we all know that children need consistency. And so they need to see your consistent example of that. I just had another couple points. So let your children see when you have to put your trust in God. And again, practical tip. I think sometimes we shelter our children. We want to protect them from experiencing anything bad. And of course, there's some things we do need to protect them from. But as they get older, they need to understand where your faith comes from. Last fall, my mom was diagnosed with lymphoma, and luckily we got a very good prognosis, and she's gone through treatment, is doing well. But at the beginning, of course, whenever you have, whenever you or a family member get a diagnosis like cancer, you don't know what's coming down the road. And so I remember, my mom called me and told me about it. I'm a very practical person, so I'm thinking, okay, this is what we're going to do. We're just going to trust God, and we're going to go through this process and learn more about what's going on, and so forth. And told my daughters, and I think that was harder on me than receiving the news, because they were upset, and I remember saying, this is where the rubber meets the road. We have to have faith. If this is something we're going through, no matter what the outcome is. So we use that as a teaching experience, and we get them involved and let them see our faith. And then number 7, let your children experience sacrifice from an early age. Some of the ways we do that, of course, within our church, we have an annual commitment offering. I don't know that we've even ever told our children that they have to give, that they all give. We all give to that commitment yearly. For 40 years, our youth choir has gone on tour each summer. The first one they went on, I was 12, and I went on, so if you're good at math, you can tell how old I am. So they go to different churches, large and small, all across the U.S. We've gone overseas. And so now my kids go. But we don't just hand them over the money to do that. It's important for them. We feel like, now we would never let that be a barrier, and we've told them. But they know our expectation is that if they're going to go minister and have fun also, then they're expected to participate in that sacrifice. And so we see that as one way to get them involved at an early age of learning how to sacrifice. And so obviously one of the other great examples of faith is Abraham. We know that his greatest accomplishment, he was the father of many nations, God gave him the promise, but his greatest accomplishment really in his life was trusting God. And so I can't imagine anything harder. Now, I know he was a man and we're all women, but I can't imagine the struggle he had. Can't imagine anything harder than waiting all of those years for this promised son. And then he hears God tell him, now take him up and offer him as a burnt sacrifice. You imagine what was going through his head. Wait a minute, God, you told me that I was going to be the father of many nations, and this doesn't seem to be the right path to fulfill that promise. And so here are some things that we can learn from Abraham about creating a culture of faith. Number 1, you have to walk by faith and know that God always provides. And so our walk with God is an everyday engagement. And in the good times and the bad, you just keep walking. And so, we walk every day. There's nothing magical about walking. But put your trust in God. And God will continue. God will start laying out the plan in your life. God has a plan for everything that happens in our lives. And he will provide the means. So can you imagine Abraham walking up that mountain with Isaac, and what he's thinking? But he just kept walking and towards that, and ultimately God provided the means. Number 2, and I feel very important, or very strongly about this one. Number 2, give your kids experiences, not things. God has blessed us, but we don't, I don't think, I'm sure my daughters would agree, we don't overindulge our children. We like Christmas and birthdays, and I'm not much of a shopper, but I'll go with them and pay for things, But there is no substitute for experiences. And so as a parent, think about the experiences that you're giving your kids, and not just the things. Experience is the best teaching tool you have. So let your kids be a part of that, or think of the different experiences as they grow. Think about the different experiences you want them to have, whether it's going on a missions trip or a choir tour, or get them involved in ministry with you, because those are the best tools for teaching. Number 3, model the behaviors you want them to have. You are their biggest role model, and you have to keep that in mind. They obviously they have teachers, they have Sunday school teachers, they have pastors, they have whatever. They have so many different people in life that they can look up to, that they see you every day. And are we perfect? No. But I've been studying the book of Joshua, and something that I like about Joshua is that God would tell him what to do, and he would just go do it. And so I love that. And this is not, none of this that I'm saying today is rocket science, but it's just a matter of really doing it, putting your just one step in front of the other, one foot in front of the other, and walking it every day. So number 4, maintain your focus on the most important things. It's so easy to get so wrapped up in the things of this world, whether it's school, of course nowadays sports are this huge thing, and we allow our kids to do some sports things within reason. Work, even when they're 16 years old and they're working, of course friends, but nothing is more important than their walk with God. We would never allow our kids to miss a church service or to take a job where they were missing the church. We just don't allow it. And so that is a line that we set in our church, and we follow that line. And so we have to maintain our focus on the most important things. Number 5, think ahead to future generations. And again, I'm so lucky to see some of us who are older in this room. I think one of the most sobering thoughts I had as I got older, and I still think on this pretty routinely, is that I really only can influence about 2 generations. And so, as I had my children and thinking, okay, I've got to influence them, hopefully I'll be around still to influence my grandchildren. But I have 2 or 3 great-grandparents when I was born, but really, they really didn't play a significant teaching role in my life. And so those of you who are grandparents for me, I want to encourage you. You have played a vital role in establishing a culture of faith within your family. You still play it. It doesn't go away because you're not their parents. And so for parents, moms, I encourage you to lean on your grandparents and involve them, let them be involved. Both my mother-in-law, my mother-in-law lives in the same room where we live, so it's a little bit easier. She has been very involved in helping me. And that's important to me because I want them to see those examples. So think ahead to the future generations. You only have so many to influence. Number 6, you're not perfect. Forgive yourself, learn from it, go on. I'm sure my kids can tell you that usually on Saturdays when you're trying to get all the housework done and things are getting really frustrating and they're making more messes than you can keep up with, especially when they're young. You might lose your cool a little bit from time to time, but we're not perfect. We may not foresee everything. We may have to learn from experiences. But when we look at examples, the examples of faith that we're following, was Abraham perfect? No. Was Isaac? No, probably not. What about Jacob? Certainly not. But as the years go by and they remain faithful, we start to see that promise fulfilled, right? So when we're looking at Abraham, and he's promised to be the father of many nations, and then he's asked to give his son, at that point he's probably thinking, what on earth is going on? But they just kept being faithful and kept walking that walk of faith. And then we get to Joseph or Jacob and the 12 sons, and we start to see how that promise is going to work out, right? And so number 7, and lastly, don't forget God's promises. So I look at my life sometimes, and wonder why I've been so blessed. Growing up, our family didn't have a lot. I worked my way through school. I worked hard all my life. I come from humble beginnings, and I'm not anything special. And so there was a time that, and there was even a time when I wondered if I really would have a family of my own. But in everything, I've tried to be above all faithful. And so how do you create that culture of faith in your home? It's pretty easy. You be faithful yourself. And so God has been faithful to me. And so if I'm going to leave you with any key point that I would want you to walk out of here today with, is that creating a culture requires intentionality, and it requires consistency. And by consistency, I'm not talking about parenting tactics. I'm talking about your walk with God. Because you are what they're going to look for, and that you have the biggest influence and the biggest example is you. And so that is the key ingredient to building a culture of faith in your home, is that you are consistent. So if those of you, if you struggle with consistency, I know I probably would make it out to be easier said than done, but when we're having church service, that's where you'll find us. Do I ever get discouraged? Of course. But I'm not going to let that keep me from the promise. And so, if I could say just any one thing, is to look to as mothers, as young mothers, even as grandmothers, is to be consistent. And so, mothers in waiting, God's got you. He knows where you are. And He sees the desire of your heart. And seek ye first the kingdom of heaven, and all of these things will be added unto you. That's the promise that I held on to for many years. And young moms, don't forget that every day you're raising the next generation. And that is the most important thing that you can do. And yes, it's frustrating, it's time-consuming, it may take you away from other things, but that's the most important thing that we can do as mothers. Moms of young adults, you've laid the foundation. Now's the time to guide them as they start making decisions. This is not turn 13 and it's hands off. We still have conversations about things. We still have a 10:30 curfew. You're not going to stay out all night. Even though I trust you, I'm not stupid. Okay? So there's still boundaries. Right? My son is 20 years old. There's still a boundary. 10:30, maybe 11 o'clock. So keep that in mind as you're raising your teenagers. And then older mothers and grandmothers, you are a precious resource. You have more time, you have experience and wisdom that you have gained in life, that you can now impart to your children. Believe it or not, your grandchildren still need you. And of course your grandchildren. Take advantage of that time and that wisdom that you have for them. And then, just lastly, mothers and prodigals. And I know that I'm talking about keeping your children in walking in faith. But, we can only do so much. And sometimes we see them waver and walk away at times. But I like what this morning it stood out to me, somebody said it in the main session, is that be still. That second part is know that He is God. And He has promises that we can hold on to. So keep walking, keep praying. His promises are not slack. His word doesn't return void. Creating a culture, these concepts are not difficult. It's accomplished by walking faithfully every day, consistently. And I have confidence in you. I think together we work together to create that next generation, that continue that walk of faith. God has ordained you. If He gave you children, He has ordained you to raise your children in this faith. They are God's gift to you. And so I just want to encourage you today. I'm sure we're out of time, but if anybody wants to connect with me, I'll be around, or connect with me on Facebook. I'm probably about the only Marsha Haldorsen on Facebook. Connect with me. I'd be glad to talk with you and be encouraged today. Thank you.